Lady Victoria Ashford stood before the ornate mirror in her private chambers, adjusting the diamond tiara that had belonged to her late mother-in-law. The reflection staring back at her showed a woman who had spent the last decade trying to earn her place in the royal family, only to discover that acceptance remained as elusive as morning mist. The kingdom of Eldoria had been her home since marrying Prince Charles 15 years ago, but she had always felt like an outsider looking in. Unlike the beloved former Princess Margaret, who had captured the nation's heart with her grace and charitable work before her tragic death in a car accident, Victoria struggled to connect with both the people and the press. Her every move was scrutinized, every smile analyzed for authenticity, every public appearance dissected by royal correspondents who seemed determined to find fault. This morning had started like any other, with her private secretary, Mrs. Henderson, bringing the usual stack of correspondence and the day's schedule. Victoria had been particularly excited about tonight's annual charity gala, a prestigious event that raised millions for various causes across the kingdom. She had spent weeks preparing, working with designers on her gown, reviewing the guest list, and memorizing details about the charitable organizations that would benefit from the evening's proceeds. The gala was more than just another royal obligation for Victoria. It represented an opportunity to step out of Margaret's shadow and make her own mark on the royal family's philanthropic efforts. She had personally suggested several new charities to include this year, organizations focused on mental health and domestic violence prevention, causes close to her heart that she hoped would help the public see her in a new light. Mrs. Henderson had seemed unusually nervous as she approached Victoria's desk, clutching a thick envelope bearing the royal seal. "Your Royal Highness," she began hesitantly, "there's been a development regarding tonight's gala." Victoria had looked up from her speech notes, immediately sensing something was wrong. The older woman's face was pale, and her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she held the envelope. "What kind of development?" Victoria asked, setting down her pen and giving Mrs. Henderson her full attention. The secretary's discomfort was palpable, and Victoria felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she got whenever palace politics reared their ugly head. "Prince William has made some last-minute changes to the arrangements," Mrs. Henderson explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "The guest list has been revised." She handed Victoria the envelope with obvious reluctance, as if she were delivering a death sentence rather than a simple communication. Victoria's hand shook as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the official document inside. Her eyes scanned the formal language, but the meaning was crystal clear. Her name had been struck from the evening's guest list, not moved to a different table, not reassigned to a lesser role, completely removed. According to the document, due to unforeseen circumstances and security considerations, her attendance was no longer deemed appropriate. The words blurred before her eyes as the full impact hit her. This wasn't just about missing a single event. This was a public humiliation, a clear signal to the entire kingdom that she was being pushed out of her own family. The gala would be covered by dozens of media outlets, and her absence would not go unnoticed. Royal correspondents would speculate endlessly about the reasons, and her enemies within the court would undoubtedly spread their own versions of the truth. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat softly. "Your Highness, there's more." Victoria looked up, wondering what could possibly be worse than what she had already read. "The palace has issued a statement saying that you're feeling unwell and will be unable to attend tonight's festivities. They've asked me to ensure that you remain in your quarters this evening." The implications were staggering. Not only was she being excluded, but they were publicly lying about the reasons and essentially placing her under house arrest in her own home. Victoria felt a surge of anger unlike anything she had experienced since joining the royal family. She had endured years of subtle slights and passive-aggressive treatment, but this was an open declaration of war. "Did Prince William provide any explanation for this decision?" Victoria asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded, despite the rage building inside her. Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. The order came directly from his office, but no specific reasons were given beyond what's written in the document. Victoria stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where workers were setting up elaborate floral arrangements for the evening's event. Seeing the preparations continue without her felt like watching her own funeral arrangements being made while she was still alive. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being excluded from an event taking place literally in her backyard. She thought about her stepson William, who had been only 12 when she married his father. She had tried so hard to build a relationship with him, to be a supportive presence without trying to replace his beloved mother. For years, she thought they had reached an understanding, if not a warm relationship. But Margaret's influence seemed to extend beyond the grave, and Victoria realized that she would always be seen as the interloper who had dared to take the place of a saint. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her chambers as Victoria contemplated her next move. She could accept this humiliation quietly, as she had accepted so many others over the years. She could retreat to her private residence in the countryside and wait for the storm to pass. Or she could fight back and demand the respect and recognition that should come with her position as the king's wife. As evening approached and the sounds of preparation grew louder outside her window, Victoria made her decision. She would not go quietly into the night, and she would not allow herself to be erased from royal history without a fight. The annual charity gala would proceed as planned, but it would not proceed without her. As the sun began to set over the kingdom of Eldoria, Victoria dismissed Mrs. Henderson and her other attendants, claiming she needed rest before her recovery from her supposed illness. Once alone, she began to formulate a plan that would ensure her presence at the gala, invited or not. Victoria had spent 15 years learning the intricate layout of the palace, including passages and entrances that most residents never knew existed. The building's history stretched back over 3 centuries, and successive renovations had created a maze of service corridors, hidden staircases, and forgotten doorways that connected different wings of the massive structure. Her first step was to contact her most trusted ally within the palace staff, Thomas Mitchell, the head of palace security. Thomas had served the royal family for over 25 years and had always maintained a professional but warm relationship with Victoria. Unlike many of the long-serving staff members who remained loyal to Margaret's memory, Thomas judged people by their actions rather than their titles or the circumstances of their arrival. Using a secure phone line in her private study, Victoria called Thomas's direct number, "Your Majesty." He answered immediately, his voice carrying its usual note of respect and concern. "I heard about the unfortunate situation with tonight's event. Is there anything I can do to assist you?" Victoria appreciated that Thomas didn't pretend to be unaware of what had happened. News traveled fast within the palace walls, and she was certain that everyone from the kitchen staff to the senior courtiers knew about her exclusion by now. "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need your complete honesty. Do you believe I pose any legitimate security risk that would justify my removal from tonight's guest list?" There was a long pause before Thomas responded. "Your Majesty, in my professional opinion, there are no credible security concerns that would prevent your attendance at tonight's gala. The threat assessment protocols I've reviewed show no unusual risks, and your security detail has not identified any specific issues." His answer confirmed what Victoria had suspected. The security justification was merely a convenient excuse to mask the real reasons for her exclusion. "Thomas, I'm going to ask something of you that may put you in a difficult position. I want to attend tonight's gala, regardless of what the official guest list says. Can you help me?" Another pause, longer this time. Victoria could almost hear Thomas weighing his loyalty to the institution against his sense of justice and fairness. Finally, he spoke. "Your Majesty, you are the queen consort of this kingdom. No guest list should supersede your right to attend royal functions. If you choose to attend tonight's gala, it is within your rights to do so. I will ensure that your security detail is prepared and that appropriate measures are in place." With Thomas's support secured, Victoria began the next phase of her plan. She would need to arrive at the gala in a way that made her exclusion impossible to ignore, while also demonstrating her rightful place within the royal family. Simply walking in through a side entrance would allow palace officials to quietly remove her before the media noticed her presence. Victoria decided to make her entrance through the main ballroom doors, at the height of the evening, when all the major donors and dignitaries would be present. The timing would be crucial, too early, and she could be escorted out before the important guests arrived. Too late, and she would miss the opportunity to make her statement. She spent the next several hours carefully preparing for what she knew would be one of the most important nights of her life. Her choice of attire would send its own message, and she selected a stunning midnight blue gown that had belonged to her late mother-in-law, the former queen. The dress had been altered to fit Victoria perfectly, and wearing it would serve as a powerful reminder of her legitimate place in the royal hierarchy. As she prepared, Victoria reflected on the events that had led to this moment. She thought about her early days in the royal family, when she had been naive enough to believe that love and good intentions would be enough to earn acceptance. She remembered the countless charity events, hospital visits, and public appearances where she had tried to prove herself worthy of the position she had inherited through marriage. The palace around her buzzed with activity. As staff members made final preparations for the gala, Victoria could hear the distant sounds of musicians rehearsing, caterers setting up elaborate serving stations, and security teams conducting last-minute sweeps of the venue. The irony that all this activity was happening in her own home while she was officially banned from attending was not lost on her. At 8 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. Victoria watched from her window as black cars and limousines deposited elegantly dressed men and women at the palace's main entrance. She recognized many of the faces wealthy philanthropists, business leaders, foreign dignitaries, and celebrities who had agreed to lend their star power to the charitable cause. Prince William arrived at 8:30, looking regal in his formal military uniform adorned with ceremonial medals and honors. Victoria felt a pang of sadness as she watched her stepson greeting guests and posing for photographers. Despite their current conflict, she had genuine affection for William and had hoped that their relationship would improve over time rather than deteriorate to this point. At 9 o'clock, the formal dinner service began. Victoria knew the evening's schedule by heart, having helped plan many similar events over the years. The cocktail reception would be followed by dinner, then speeches from various charity representatives, and finally dancing and continued fundraising activities that would extend well into the night. Victoria made her final preparations as the clock approached 9:30. She had timed her entrance to coincide with the transition between dinner and the evening speeches, when guests would be moving around, and the formal seating arrangements would become more relaxed. This would maximize the number of people who would witness her arrival, while minimizing the opportunity for security to intervene without causing a scene. As she took one last look in the mirror, Victoria saw not just a woman preparing to crash a party, but a queen preparing to reclaim her rightful position. The events of this evening would determine not just her immediate future, but her legacy within the royal family and her relationship with the people of Eldoria. Thomas's voice crackled through her secure communication device. "Your Majesty, all preparations are in place. Your security detail is positioned, and I've briefed them on the situation. Are you ready to proceed?" Victoria took a deep breath, straightened her tiara, and headed toward the door that would take her from exile back into the heart of royal life. The service corridors of the palace had never seemed so long as Victoria made her way through the dimly lit passages toward the main ballroom. Her heels clicked softly against the stone floors that had been worn smooth by centuries of servants and staff members moving unseen through the building's hidden arteries. Thomas had provided her with a detailed route that would bring her to a concealed entrance behind the ballroom's main stage. From there, she would have a clear view of the proceedings and could time her entrance for maximum impact. As she walked, Victoria could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and classical music filtering through the walls. She paused at a small window that overlooked the ballroom from above and surveyed the scene below. The room was magnificent, decorated with thousands of white roses and golden candles that cast a warm glow over the assembled guests. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and elaborate ice sculptures served as centerpieces for the various buffet stations. Prince William stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of foreign ambassadors and their wives. He looked confident and at ease, clearly comfortable in his role as the evening's host. Victoria noticed that several guests were looking around the room, obviously wondering about her absence. She caught snippets of whispered conversations as people speculated about her mysterious illness. Lady Catherine Beaumont, one of the kingdom's most prominent socialites and a longtime friend of the late Princess Margaret, was holding court near the main entrance. Victoria could see her gesturing dramatically as she spoke to a group of influential donors, undoubtedly sharing her own theories about the evening's arrangements. Lady Catherine had never made any secret of her disapproval of Victoria's marriage to the king, and she would certainly be pleased by tonight's developments. As Victoria continued her observation, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the place where her official portrait usually hung during royal events, there was now a large photograph of Princess Margaret, taken during one of her final public appearances before her death. The message was clear and unmistakable. Margaret remained the true queen in the eyes of many, even 15 years after her passing. The sight of Margaret's portrait overlooking the gala that Victoria had helped plan strengthened her resolve. She had spent too many years living in the shadow of a dead woman, and tonight would mark the beginning of her emergence from that darkness. At precisely 9:45, as the dinner service was concluding and guests began moving toward the stage area for the evening's speeches, Victoria made her move. She slipped through the concealed door and found herself in a small alcove behind the stage's main curtains. From this position, she could hear every word being spoken and could monitor the crowd's reactions. Prince William was introducing the first speaker, a representative from the Children's Hospital Foundation that would benefit from the evening's donations. The woman spoke eloquently about the hospital's work and the impact that charitable contributions had made on countless young lives. Victoria felt a surge of pride, remembering her own visits to the hospital and the relationships she had built with both staff and patients over the years. As the speech concluded and applause filled the ballroom, Victoria knew her moment had arrived. She stepped out from behind the curtains and walked calmly onto the stage, her midnight blue gown shimmering under the bright lights. For a moment, the ballroom fell completely silent as guests struggled to process what they were seeing. Prince William's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then barely controlled anger. He had been in the middle of introducing the next speaker when Victoria appeared, and he now found himself in the impossible position of either acknowledging her presence or trying to ignore his own stepmother on stage. Victoria approached the microphone with the grace and confidence that had been drilled into her through years of royal protocol training. She smiled warmly at the audience, many of whom were now whispering urgently to their companions or fumbling for their phones to capture this unexpected development. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom. "I apologize for my late arrival, but I simply could not miss the opportunity to be here with you tonight, supporting these wonderful charitable causes that mean so much to our kingdom." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some guests applauded politely, unsure of the proper protocol for this unusual situation. Others remained silent, clearly aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented in royal history. The media representatives present began frantically taking notes and photos, recognizing that they were documenting a moment that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Prince William stepped forward, his jaw clenched and his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion, "I believe there has been some confusion this evening. As announced earlier, Her Majesty has been feeling unwell and was not expected to attend tonight's festivities." Victoria turned to face her stepson, maintaining her composure despite the obvious tension between them. "Thank you for your concern, William, but as you can see, I've made a remarkable recovery. I simply couldn't bear the thought of missing such an important event, especially one that supports causes so close to my heart." The ballroom had become eerily quiet as guests realized they were witnessing a very public family dispute. Many of the attendees had known both Victoria and William for years, and they could sense the deeper currents of conflict flowing beneath the surface of this polite exchange. Palace security personnel had begun moving closer to the stage, but Thomas's careful positioning of Victoria's own security detail created a subtle standoff. No one wanted to be responsible for physically removing the Queen Consort from a royal event, especially with hundreds of witnesses and media representatives present. Victoria seized the moment to address the audience directly. "I want to thank all of you for your generous support of tonight's charitable causes. Your contributions will make a real difference in the lives of children, families, and individuals throughout our kingdom who need our help most." She paused, scanning the crowd and making eye contact with several prominent donors and community leaders. "Some of you may have heard reports of my illness this evening, and I appreciate your concern. However, I believe that sometimes we must push through our discomfort when duty calls. Tonight's causes are too important for personal considerations to interfere with the important work we're here to support. Lady Catherine Beaumont had pushed her way to the front of the crowd and was staring up at Victoria with undisguised hostility. Several other longtime palace insiders wore similar expressions, clearly viewing Victoria's appearance as an inappropriate breach of protocol and respect for royal hierarchy. But Victoria also noticed supportive faces in the crowd. Younger nobles who had grown up during her tenure as queen consort, representatives from the charities she had personally championed, and several foreign dignitaries who appreciated her dedication to diplomatic relations. Prince William made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. While we all appreciate Her Majesty's dedication to charitable causes, I think it would be best if she were able to rest and recover fully from her recent indisposition. Victoria smiled graciously and nodded to the crowd. William is quite right to be concerned about my health, as any caring stepson would be. However, I've found that the best medicine for any ailment is the company of good friends supporting worthy causes. The tension in the ballroom was now palpable, and Victoria knew she had achieved her primary objective. Her exclusion from the guest list was now public knowledge, and any attempt to remove her would only further highlight the conflict within the royal family. The standoff on the ballroom stage had created an atmosphere of electric tension that rippled through the assembled guests. Victoria could see phones being raised discreetly as people began recording the unprecedented confrontation between stepmother and stepson. She knew that within hours, footage of this moment would be circulating across social media and news networks throughout the kingdom and beyond. Prince William's advisors had gathered in a tight huddle near the edge of the stage, frantically whispering among themselves as they tried to determine the best course of action. The original schedule called for several more speeches and presentations, but the carefully orchestrated evening had been thrown into complete chaos by Victoria's unexpected appearance. Victoria decided to press her advantage while she still held the room's attention. "Before I allow the evening's planned festivities to continue," she announced, "I'd like to take a moment to address some recent developments that have affected our royal family, and by extension the important charitable work we're here to support tonight." A collective intake of breath could be heard throughout the ballroom. Many of the guests had suspected that deeper conflicts were brewing within the palace, but no one had expected such a public airing of internal disputes. "Over the past several years," Victoria continued, "there have been persistent suggestions that my role within the royal family should be diminished or eliminated entirely. Some have argued that my position is somehow illegitimate, or that my contributions to our kingdom's welfare are inadequate." Prince William's face had grown increasingly pale as Victoria spoke, and he appeared to be struggling with the decision of whether to interrupt her or allow her to continue. His advisors were making urgent gestures, clearly advocating for some form of intervention, but William seemed paralyzed by the public nature of the confrontation. Victoria's voice remained calm and measured, but her words carried the weight of years of accumulated frustration and hurt. "I want to assure everyone present tonight that I have never taken my responsibilities lightly. Every hospital visit, every diplomatic meeting, every charitable engagement has been approached with the sincere desire to serve this kingdom and its people to the best of my ability." Several guests in the front rows began nodding in agreement, apparently moved by Victoria's heartfelt words. She had indeed been a dedicated and hard-working member of the royal family, regardless of the personal conflicts that had developed behind palace walls. "However," Victoria continued, "it has become clear that certain individuals believe my continued presence within the royal family is no longer welcome or appropriate. Tonight's events have made this position unmistakably clear." The crowd was now hanging on every word, recognizing that they were witnessing royal history in the making. Never before had such a public dispute been aired during an official royal function, and the implications for the monarchy's future were staggering. Lady Catherine Beaumont chose this moment to make her own intervention. "Your Majesty," she called out from the crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "surely these personal matters would be better discussed in private, rather than disrupting an evening dedicated to charitable causes." Victoria turned to face Lady Catherine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You raise an excellent point, Lady Beaumont. I too believe that personal matters should be handled privately. Unfortunately, when one's invitation to public events is revoked without explanation or consultation, private discussion becomes rather difficult." The implication was clear to everyone present. Victoria had been deliberately excluded from the evening's festivities, and her appearance was an act of defiance rather than mere confusion or miscommunication. Prince William finally found his voice, stepping forward to address both Victoria and the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're allowing a simple misunderstanding to overshadow the important work we're here to accomplish tonight. Perhaps we should table this discussion and focus on the charitable causes that brought us all together." But Victoria was not finished. "William is absolutely correct that we should focus on charitable causes. That's precisely why I couldn't allow myself to be absent from tonight's gala. These organizations depend on royal support and patronage, and I refuse to let personal conflicts interfere with their vital work." She gestured toward the various charity representatives who had been scheduled to speak throughout the evening. The Children's Hospital Foundation, the Domestic Violence Prevention Society, the Mental Health Awareness Campaign. These organizations have worked tirelessly throughout the year, and they deserve the full support of the royal family, not the truncated attention of a diminished royal presence. Her words struck a chord with many of the guests, particularly those directly involved with the featured charities. They had indeed been expecting Victoria's participation, and her absence would have been noticed and questioned. Thomas Mitchell appeared at the edge of the stage, his presence serving as a subtle reminder that Victoria's security detail remained in position, and that any attempt to forcibly remove her would require careful consideration. Prince William's advisors had apparently reached some form of consensus, because one of them approached William and whispered urgently in his ear. William's expression shifted from anger to resignation, and he nodded slowly as he listened to whatever counsel he was receiving. "Your Majesty," William said finally, addressing Victoria with formal politeness that barely concealed his fury, "perhaps we could find a way to proceed with tonight's agenda while accommodating your unexpected recovery from illness." Victoria recognized this as a face-saving gesture that would allow both of them to avoid further escalation while maintaining some semblance of royal dignity. She also knew that accepting this olive branch would demonstrate her willingness to put charitable causes above personal conflict. "That would be most gracious of you, William," she replied, matching his formal tone. "I'm sure our guests are eager to hear from the remarkable organizations we're supporting tonight, and I wouldn't want to delay their presentations any further." The crowd seemed to exhale collectively as the immediate tension began to dissipate. However, everyone present understood that this was merely a temporary truce rather than a genuine resolution of the underlying conflicts. Victoria moved gracefully to one side of the stage, positioning herself where she would be visible to the audience but not competing with the scheduled speakers for attention. Her presence would serve as a constant reminder of the evening's dramatic turn of events, but she would not further disrupt the charitable proceedings. As the next speaker took the microphone and began discussing the mental health awareness campaign's recent initiatives, Victoria smiled and applauded appropriately. But her mind was already turning to the implications of what had just occurred and the battles that would certainly follow in the days and weeks ahead. The evening's events had achieved her immediate goal of refusing to be quietly erased from royal life, but they had also escalated the conflict with William to a level that would be difficult to reverse. The public nature of their confrontation meant that palace officials, media representatives, and foreign dignitaries would all be watching carefully to see how the royal family handled this unprecedented situation. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the ballroom gradually shifted from shocked tension to curious fascination. Guests who had initially seemed uncomfortable with the royal family drama unfolding before them began to appreciate the historic nature of what they were witnessing. Many had attended dozens of similar royal events over the years, but none had ever seen such raw emotion and genuine conflict displayed so publicly. Victoria maintained her position at the side of the stage throughout the remaining speeches, applauding at appropriate moments and nodding appreciatively as various charity representatives described their organization's work. Her presence served as a constant reminder of the evening's extraordinary circumstances, but she was careful not to upstage the speakers or further disrupt the charitable proceedings. The irony was not lost on her that some of the most heartfelt applause of the evening came during the presentation by the Domestic Violence Prevention Society, an organization that Victoria had personally championed for years. The representative spoke movingly about the importance of standing up to abuse and refusing to be silenced by those who sought to control and diminish others. The parallels to Victoria's own situation were unmistakable, and several guests glanced meaningfully in her direction as the speaker emphasized the courage required to break free from oppressive circumstances. Prince William had recovered his composure and was performing his host duties with professional competence, but the strain was evident in his rigid posture and forced smiles. Every interaction with Victoria was conducted with exaggerated formality, creating an atmosphere of cold politeness that everyone present could feel. As the formal presentations concluded and the evening moved into its social phase, with dancing and continued fundraising activities, Victoria found herself approached by various guests who wanted to express their support or simply satisfy their curiosity about the evening's events. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez from the neighboring kingdom of Valdoria was among the first to seek Victoria out. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "I wanted to express my admiration for your dedication to tonight's charitable causes. Your commitment to attending despite personal difficulties demonstrates the kind of leadership our region needs." Victoria appreciated the diplomatic phrasing that acknowledged the evening's conflicts without taking explicit sides. "Thank you, Ambassador. I believe that when we make commitments to support important causes, we must honor those commitments regardless of personal circumstances." Lady Margaret Thornton, a prominent philanthropist who had worked closely with Victoria on several charitable initiatives, was more direct in her approach. "Your Majesty, I've been watching tonight's developments with great interest. I hope you know that many of us have tremendous respect for the work you've done over the years, and we would hate to see that work interrupted by political considerations." The message was clear. Victoria had allies among the kingdom's charitable community who would support her continued involvement in philanthropic activities, regardless of internal royal family disputes. However, not all interactions were supportive. Lord Hamilton Fitzgerald, a longtime ally of the late Princess Margaret, made his disapproval evident through pointed comments about the importance of respecting traditional protocols and maintaining appropriate boundaries within royal hierarchy. "One would hope," he said within Victoria's hearing, "that certain individuals would recognize when their presence has become more of a distraction than a contribution to important causes." Victoria chose not to respond directly to such comments, but she made note of who was supporting her position and who was opposing it. These alliances would be crucial in the political battles that were certain to follow. As the evening drew toward its conclusion, Victoria realized that her gamble had largely succeeded. She had refused to be quietly erased from royal life, she had demonstrated her continued support for important charitable causes, and she had forced the conflict with William into the open where it could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The final tally of the evening's charitable fundraising exceeded expectations, partly because many guests had been so energized by the dramatic proceedings that they made larger contributions than originally planned. The combination of royal drama and worthy causes had created an atmosphere of excitement that translated into generous donations. At midnight, as guests began departing and the ballroom slowly emptied, Victoria prepared to make her own exit. She had achieved her immediate objectives, but she knew that the real challenges would begin tomorrow when palace officials, media representatives, and royal family members had time to fully process the evening's events. Prince William approached her as she gathered her belongings, his expression unreadable. "I trust you're feeling much better now," he said, the words carrying multiple layers of meaning. "Indeed I am, William," Victoria replied. "Sometimes the best cure for any ailment is remembering one's purpose and responsibilities." They looked at each other for a long moment, both recognizing that their relationship had been fundamentally altered by the evening's confrontation. The careful balance they had maintained for years had been shattered, and whatever came next would require new rules and new boundaries. "I hope you understand," William said quietly, "that there will be consequences for tonight's recovery." Victoria smiled sadly. "There are always consequences for standing up for oneself, William. The question is whether one chooses to live with the consequences of action or the regrets of inaction." As Victoria left the ballroom, escorted by Thomas and her security detail, she reflected on the evening's events and their implications for her future. She had won this particular battle, but the war for her place in the royal family was far from over. The next morning would bring intense media coverage, urgent palace meetings, and difficult conversations with other royal family members. But for tonight, Victoria had reclaimed her voice and her dignity. She had refused to be silently erased from the royal story, and whatever came next, she would face it as a queen who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. The kingdom of Eldoria had witnessed an unprecedented display of royal family conflict, but it had also seen a demonstration of courage, principle, and the refusal to be diminished by those who sought to control the narrative of power and legitimacy. As her car pulled away from the palace, Victoria looked back at the building that had been both her home and her prison for 15 years. Tonight had changed everything, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But she faced the future with the knowledge that she had found her voice and the strength to use it, regardless of the cost.